I don't consider myself a highly sensitive person, but when it comes to environmental stimuli, my mind and body can be very responsive to that stimulus. My body starts kind of getting into a more protective stance where my muscles tense, my shoulders kind of hunch forward a little more. I get irritable. I have trouble absorbing information, probably because I have so much information and stimulus coming in at once. And this tends to be much worse when I have mental overload, when I have a bunch of things that I'm trying to complete or get done at once, or I'm coming upon a deadline and I'm starting to stress. Like right now, I'm in the process of preparing for a trip that's tomorrow morning. I'm going to be going to Arkansas with Chloe, and it's just going to be the two of us. So we're going to be flying together, staying in a hotel. And so there's like this whole mental preparation for that. And at the same time, this preparation of, all these things that I was hoping to have gotten done by now, that now we're reaching that deadline and haven't, completed it. So, I'm starting to feel a little more stimulated by things that are just in my environment than I would normally be. So that's just an example of how sometimes just mental overload can lead to even more physical stimulus overload. But if you find yourself like me, sometimes easily overwhelmed by sensory input, tailoring your home to minimize overstimulation can be like a soothing balm for your well-being. It can just make things so much easier. So here are some ways that I've learned to create a more serene and controlled sensory environment inside of my own space. For me, the most disruptive and overwhelming stimulus has always been sound. And I can block out a lot of sound just depending on how over or understimulated I am, like Chloe sounds, because we have a 1.5-year-old for those who don't know. And, she makes a lot of sounds. Sometimes she'll get fussy. And that doesn't grate on me as much as maybe it would somebody who's not used to hearing those sounds. But when I do get overstimulated, the sounds are what I'm the most sensitive to. Some workarounds and my go-tos are, for one, loops. So these are little earplugs essentially, but you can buy them for different decibel levels. So it still blocks out a lot, and they're really soft and easy to sleep on. Actually, I just took a nap in my loops like a couple hours ago. But if Chloe's crying, I'll still be able to hear that. It doesn't completely block out everything. And since getting AirPods in the past year and a half, I would say, those are great too because they have noise canceling built into them. The only drawback is that they do need to be recharged, so I can't just wear them indefinitely like I could my loops. And also they do have the AirPod stems, which make them not so great for sleeping in. They can fall out. When I'm feeling overstimulated to sound, I don't use music or background noises. I would rather opt for silence, which I think as a society just feels strange nowadays. Like we try to avoid silence at all costs. But I notice even ambient sounds, like Matt sleeps with brown noise playing through our dot, which is fine for while we sleep, and it's even nice for drowning out some other smaller sounds. But he can wake up in the morning and not even notice that it's still playing. Like it could play throughout the day inside of our bedroom. But as soon as I wake up, I immediately want that sound off. I don't want some kind of constant background noise happening. I would rather have the silence. I limit alarms and notifications. If I need to wake up at a certain time really early, like I do tomorrow for a flight, then I'll use an alarm. But even notifications, I will frequently silence my phone. If I'm doing anything else, I'll silence my phone, much to my family's annoyance. But also, I set times of day for quiet on my phone. I don't receive any notifications or phone calls or messages if it's after 9 o'clock at night or before 10 o'clock in the morning. I need that space of not being dinged and bugged and notified. Limiting unnecessary room sounds and echoes has been super helpful, and there are rooms that I still wish had a little less echo, but doing things like adding curtains, especially if you're able to add thick curtains, thick carpets, and wall hangings. They don't have to be cloth wall hangings, but anything that kind of breaks up the flat planes of the walls and floors will keep the sounds from amplifying. Even small sounds can sound really loud and really big when they're bouncing off all of those surfaces. When you're feeling overwhelmed from too much input, drawing back in and centering, like just giving yourself and your body and your own mind a little bit of attention, is a great way to combat the overstimulation by healing internally, if you will, letting yourself get back to that rest, back to that state of neutral being, because we're not constantly overstimulated, even when we're surrounded by stimulus. It usually happens when we just have too much going on for too long or at one time. And so getting back to center can help to soothe all of that overwhelm over. The best ways that I've found for myself to do that are through sleep, which we all need, and it helps just to reset and regenerate and, recuperate. Sleep is one of the best things that you can do for your body, especially when you're feeling overwhelmed. But also things like yoga to help move a lot of that physical tension from the overstimulus out of my body, to help move it away, release a lot of the knots and the tightness and the stress from breathing a little more shallowly, and meditation. And meditation can look differently for every person. You could just be sitting quietly in your own mind for meditation. You could be listening to some kind of soothing music that just helps to soothe your nerves. It could be being guided by somebody else who helps to get you out of your own little perception bubble for a little bit and reminds you to calm and to take a deep breath and to maybe view things a little bit differently, or just to give you something to visualize that's not involving all of the stimulation that you're currently surrounded by. When I'm feeling overstimulated, short of laying down and taking a nap, I will pop in my AirPods and play something from my Aura app. Aura is our sponsor for today's video, but they're also an app that I've just personally used for several years now. For some reason, I have one of those brains that likes to resist nighttime sleep. I'm okay during the day. I can take a nap like it's nobody's business, but when it comes to shutting down for the day, the finality of it, turning everything off, it causes me a lot of anxiety. So I usually have to play something or do something to get myself into a space where I naturally am ready to drift off. And it's the weirdest thing whenever I do take the time to just pop in my earbuds and play anything from the Aura app, because it's like Spotify for your mind, body, and soul. Like, they have all different kinds of sounds and stories and coaches, anything that you could think of. And so I'll find something that just feels like it's in line with whatever my brain and my nerves need that particular night, and I fall asleep almost immediately every time I do this. I have a link in the description that will give you a free trial, and if you wanted to get their premium version, it'll give you 25% off of that premium version for the first 500 people who use that link. Aside from centering, disconnecting is probably one of the most powerful things that you can do, and it's probably the most obvious choice also. If you're feeling overstimulated by everything that's surrounding you, especially your technology, then the best way to stop being overstimulated is to disconnect from those things. Things like stepping foot outside can actually sweep away that sensory overload from either a bustling house or a bustling store. Like if you're at the mall and you're starting to feel a little bit overwhelmed, even just stepping outside of that mall, feeling the breeze for a little bit, letting the sunlight shine on your face, it's like it wipes away that sensory overload. Disconnecting from tech is really a huge one. I do keep my use of tech really focused and intentional. I'm not active on social media. I'm really never on social media. I make these videos for YouTube, and I will watch other people's YouTube videos either to learn or to get inspired, but I don't consider that like social media. I'm not sitting there interacting with everybody and trying to keep up with what everybody's doing, and that just sounds really stimulating to me, and so I just don't do it. But I do have other sources of stimulation that are my weaknesses. Getting into my creative platforms or looking at different analytics and spreadsheets. What I've started doing is using apps like the 1Sec app to force myself to take a breath. Like, it literally gives me a prompt to inhale and then exhale whenever I try to open one of these apps that I've attached it to. And that helps me to disconnect from doing things mindlessly and adding in extra mindless stimuli that I don't really need to be adding in. Another thing that I do inside of my home is that I have controlled lighting set up. Now, I'm a big natural lighting person. It's such a mood lifter for me. Of course, come evening and nighttime, we can't really rely on natural lighting at all. So there are several low-level lights. It really gives us maximum control in the bedroom, which is where I spend the bulk of my evenings. And they're all voice controlled, and all but one of them are dimmable. We never even use the overhead fan light that's directly overhead. It helps to keep the light from being stark and overbearing and, just like having this sensory input that can't be controlled of light and what direction it's coming from. And finally, one of the most effective ways that I've reduced visual sensory overload is by reducing clutter and just general stuff in my environment. Obviously, clutter can be a source of stress and overwhelm, not to mention the constant churning of just picking things up throughout the day can add not only visual sensory overload, but also tactile overload of constantly having to be grabbing things and picking things up and moving things out of the way, and just this constant, physical, tactile stimulation from all of the things that you're having to touch and take care of. And so I decided a long time ago that I prefer not to have that, and that by keeping my space simple, I've drastically lowered my sensory input levels. So again, this is going to look differently for everybody depending on what works for your body and what you feel most stimulated by. For me, the sounds, the lighting, centering and disconnecting, and then practicing minimalism in my space have been my perfect little recipe for having a low stimulus home space, a space that I don't feel overly stimulated in and feel like my nerves are grating constantly. And that whenever I do start feeling like that, I have tools and methods of being able to work around that are built into my space. I think it's really important that whatever it is that you're dealing with and experiencing, that you have a home environment that is supporting you and your needs through that. I'd like to thank Aura Health for sponsoring this video. If you enjoyed this video and got some benefit out of it, I do invite you to subscribe and give it a thumbs up, and I will chat with you guys next week.